The city was alive with the hum of busy streets, neon lights flickering as the evening settled in. Among the towering skyscrapers and high-end stores, a small girl weaved her way through the crowds, her tiny hand gripping her grandmother's with gentle determination. She was no more than 7, with curly brown hair and wide, curious eyes that took in the world around her with innocent wonder. The grandmother, a frail woman in her 70s, walked slowly, her steps careful but steady. She was dressed in a simple, worn-out coat, her kind face marked with the lines of time. They didn't belong in this part of the city, where luxury cars lined the streets and people dressed in designer clothes walked with an air of importance. But tonight was different. Tonight, the little girl had a mission. Just outside an elegant hotel, a small crowd had gathered, murmuring among themselves, their eyes fixed on a man stepping out of a sleek black car. He was tall, with silver-streaked hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. His tailored suit alone was worth more than most people made in a year. The billionaire, that's what everyone called him. His name was whispered in news headlines, his fortune discussed in hushed voices. He was a man who had built empires, controlled industries, and dined with the most powerful people in the world. But to the little girl, he was just another person, someone she needed to talk to. With quiet confidence, she let go of her grandmother's hand and moved forward, her small feet stepping onto the hotel's grand entrance. The security guards tensed, but the billionaire lifted a hand, stopping. Then, before they could pull her away, something about her made him pause. She looked up at him, unafraid, her voice clear and sweet. "Sir," she said, tilting her head slightly, "my grandmother has a birthmark just like yours." For a second, there was silence. The billionaire's brow furrowed as he processed her words. Birthmark. He hadn't thought about it in years. A small mark just above his wrist. A detail so insignificant, yet somehow personal. His gaze shifted from the little girl to the old woman standing a few feet away. The grandmother stood still, her lips slightly parted, her eyes searching his face. And then, something flickered in her expression, something close to recognition. The billionaire felt a strange, uneasy sensation stir within him. He had spent his life calculating risks, making billion-dollar decisions without hesitation. But this was different. He took a slow step forward. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice quieter now. The little girl smiled. "She has the same one, right here." She pointed to her own wrist, then turned to her grandmother. "Grandma, show him." The old woman hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the sleeve of her coat, rolling it up just enough to reveal a small, faded birthmark. The billionaire stared at it. His breath caught. For the first time in years, memories he had long buried threatened to surface. Memories of a time before the money, before the success. A past he had never looked back on, until now. He looked at the grandmother again, truly seeing her this time. And in that moment, he knew this wasn't just a coincidence. Something from his past had just walked back into his life, and he had no idea what it would mean. The billionaire felt his throat tighten as he stared at the old woman's wrist. The birthmark was identical to his. Same shape, same faded edges. A rush of unease settled in his chest. He had spent a lifetime burying the past, locking away memories that had no place in the world he had built. Yet here it was, standing before him in the form of a fragile old woman and a wide-eyed little girl. The grandmother's hands trembled slightly as she pulled her sleeve back down. Her gaze never left his face, studying him as if trying to confirm something buried deep in her heart. The air between them felt thick, filled with unspoken words and years of distance. "Do I know you?" The billionaire's voice was quieter now, almost hesitant. It was a strange thing, to feel unsure in a world where he was always in control. The old woman exhaled shakily. "You remind me of someone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone I lost a long time ago." The little girl's face lit up with excitement. "That's what I told Grandma. I saw your picture in the newspaper and I thought, maybe, just maybe." She looked up at the billionaire with innocent hope. "Are you the one she's been looking for?" The billionaire's pulse quickened. He didn't know what she meant, but something in his gut told him this wasn't a misunderstanding. He wasn't a man who believed in fate or coincidences. His success had come from strategy, not chance. But this felt different. He took a step closer. "Who are you?" he asked the old woman. She hesitated, as if afraid to say the words. Then, in a trembling voice, she spoke. "My name is Eleanor." The name sent a jolt through him. He knew that name. Somewhere, deep in the locked chambers of his past, it meant something. His mind raced, searching through the fragments of childhood memories he had long abandoned. The past had never been kind to him. He had grown up alone, bouncing from one foster home to another. He had no family, no roots. At least, that's what he had always believed. He had built his empire from nothing, fueled by the hunger to prove to the world that he didn't need anyone. But now, standing in front of this frail woman with the same birthmark as his, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt. The little girl, sensing his hesitation, tugged at his sleeve. "Grandma always told me about her brother," she said, her voice soft but sure. "She lost him when she was little. They got separated, and she never found him again." His breath caught in his throat. "Brother." A flash of memory hit him like a lightning strike. A warm hand holding his in the dark. A soft voice whispering his name. The feeling of being pulled away, tiny fingers slipping from his grasp. It couldn't be. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I had a brother," she said, her voice breaking. "We were taken to different homes. I searched for him for years, but I never found him." The billionaire's chest tightened. He had no memories of a sister. Or maybe he had forced himself to forget. His life had been built on survival. There was no space for the past, no room for what-ifs. He had convinced himself that he had always been alone. But what if he was wrong? His hands clenched into fists. He didn't know what to say, what to feel. If this woman was telling the truth, then everything he believed about himself, his identity, his history, was a lie. The crowd around them had started to dissipate, but a few curious onlookers still lingered, whispering among themselves. The billionaire knew he had to make a decision. He couldn't stand here forever, frozen between the life he had built and the life he might have lost. Finally, he looked at the little girl, her face full of hope and expectation. Then he looked at Eleanor. "Come with me," he said. Eleanor's lips parted in surprise. Where?" He glanced at the hotel behind him. "Inside. We need to talk." The little girl beamed, grabbing her grandmother's hand. "I told you. Grandma, I told you he'd listen." Eleanor wiped at her eyes, nodding as if she couldn't believe this moment was real. The billionaire turned toward the hotel doors, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He had spent decades running from his past, but now it had found him, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he was ready to face it. Inside the grand hotel lobby, the billionaire led Eleanor and the little girl to a quiet corner, away from the curious stares. The room smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers, But for the first time in years, he barely noticed his surroundings. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. Eleanor sat down carefully, her hands still trembling. The little girl, unaware of the deep emotions stirring between them, swung her legs happily, as if she had just completed a grand adventure. The billionaire took a deep breath and looked at Eleanor. "Tell me everything." She swallowed hard, as if afraid that saying it out loud would make the moment disappear. "We were just children when we were separated," she began. "Our parents, they died in an accident. We had no one. We were placed in foster care, but they didn't keep us together." She blinked, her eyes shining with old pain. "I was taken to one home. You were taken somewhere else. And after that, I never saw you again." He clenched his jaw. The words felt distant, like a story that belonged to someone else. He had no memory of parents, no memory of a sister, just the endless cycle of temporary homes and unfamiliar faces. He had been told he was alone, that he had always been alone. Eleanor reached for his hand hesitantly. "I never stopped looking for you," she said. "Everywhere I went, I asked, but there was never any trace of you." She paused, her voice breaking. "I thought maybe you didn't make it." The billionaire felt something crack inside him. He had spent his whole life believing he had no past, but here it was, sitting right in front of him, holding onto his hand as if afraid to lose him again. He glanced at the little girl, her bright eyes full of curiosity. "And you?" he asked. "How did you find me?" She grinned proudly. "Grandma always told me about her brother. She never gave up. And then one day, I saw your picture in the newspaper. I told Grandma, maybe it's him." She didn't believe me at first, but I just knew. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You do look like her, you know." Something inside him shifted. He had spent years surrounded by powerful people, yet he had never felt a connection to anyone. But now, sitting here with this woman and this little girl, he felt something foreign, a sense of belonging. Eleanor squeezed his hand. "I don't need anything from you," she said softly. "I just wanted to know if you were still out there, if you were okay." He looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't asking for money, wasn't here for his name. She had spent her whole life searching for him, not because he was a billionaire, but because he was her brother. For the first time in decades, he let his guard down. "I don't remember," he admitted. "I don't remember any of it." Eleanor smiled, though tears streamed down her face. "That's okay," she whispered. "I remember enough for both of us." Something deep inside him, a part of himself he didn't even know was missing, finally settled. He had spent his life chasing success, believing that wealth and power were all that mattered. But sitting here with the sister he had lost and the niece who had never stopped believing, he realized something. This was what mattered. Family. He exhaled slowly, then did something he hadn't done in a very long time. He reached out and pulled Eleanor into a hug. She let out a quiet sob, holding onto him as if she never wanted to let go. The little girl giggled and wrapped her tiny arms around both of them. For the first time in his life, the billionaire wasn't thinking about deals or bank accounts. He wasn't worried about the next business move or the next headline. For the first time, he was just a brother, and that was enough.